I'm John Morrow, City of Ellensburg. Kaela and I and Amy did a grant about 4, maybe 5 years ago with Department of Ecology. Gateway 1, it's retrofitting LID stormwater for 2 miles of University Way of runoff that's currently untreated, and we're halfway through construction. And as we get to questions, you'll get to hear all kinds of things.
Mark Papich, I'm an engineer for the city of Spokane. I work in our capital programs group, so I'm doing kind of a lot of the upfront scheduling, scoping, and budgeting for utility projects, stormwater, sewer, and water. So I suppose my relevance to this committee is any of you that are doing that same kind of work. It's a constant shuffle right now, trying to keep up with costs and material issues and things like that. So.
Hello, Shilo, Sprouse. I'm with the Washington State Department of Ecology now for about 3 weeks. I do grants and loans for the eastern region, but formerly I've managed industrial construction and municipal permits for the last 16 years.
Hi there, Jessica Schwing. I'm the unit suit for our Stormwater Financial Assistance Unit over at Department of Ecology, and I've been working with our funding programs for part of 10 years or so.
Hi, I'm Tony Bush. I'm with WSDOT. I'm the Stormwater Branch Manager. And I wanted to talk a little today just about some of the zoomed out kind of statewide programmatic approaches. We just received $500 million for our standalone retrofit program from the legislature. And so we're doing a lot of planning and really thinking about costs, of course, moving forward and how we can make that investment go as far as we can for statewide. Thank you.
I'm Keith Dusler. I am the work for WSDOT. I am the North Central Region hydraulics engineer. I've been in construction of some form for 80+ years, residential, municipal, railroad, airports. And I think I'm here because I am located in Wenatchee. I am the hydraulics person, and most engineers run when they hear hydraulics the other way.
Hi, Adam Benton. I am currently the stormwater and wastewater manager, utility manager for the city of Marysville. Been in the stormwater world for about 17 years, started in the private sector, came to the city 14 years ago as a surface water specialist, and I've worked my way up through the ranks, spent about 6 years in the engineering department. I think I'm probably here because I've managed 4 LID projects over the last 8 years, and written a bunch of grants for upcoming LID retrofit projects.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. All right, the first question that I have is, how have you adjusted timelines or schedules to accommodate escalating costs on recent projects? And paired with that, what about staffing or workload structures and what adjustments you've made there? Anybody want to start?
I can start, I guess.
Okay.
So the answer to that question, from the city of Spokane's perspective is yes. We've done a whole bunch of adjusting and things like that. I guess like a lot of utilities, we do have an enterprise rate fund, so we do generate income. However, it's a pretty fixed number every year. So I'll use the example of our Cochrane Basin project. We have a control vault. We had budgeted somewhere in the neighborhood of like $6.5 million. Well, the bid came in at like 8 million. So, it's like, so then you start the process of, okay, well, we have this fixed budget that we're dealing with. Something's got to give. So what we've been doing the last couple of years, it's, you look down, you have a certain number of projects that you're planning on doing in any given year. So we look down at the bottom of that list and say, well, this project has to get punted to next year, or maybe we're going to reduce the scope on some of these to try and make up for some of that. So it's just a whole lot of jostling things around that nobody likes, and just kind of a back to life right now for us.
I can jump in. I would say actually the answer for us is no, we haven't adjusted our schedules. I would say that the primary reason for that is because most of our projects are grant funded. They're on a grant timeline. So that's a known quantity for us. What we have tried to do is just impress upon our executive department and all the powers that be that these are challenges that they're facing. And so far, at least fortunately for us in Marysville, our executive department has been really excited about these LID projects, particularly because we've selected locations that they found to be beneficial. And as of this date, we haven't run into any issues there. They've just been funding that gap. So we'll see how that goes in the future, but we're also trying to do some other things.
Can we ask what? I just asked, so with the way the bids are coming in, for the contractor's gonna be building this, right? So that means you're having to do less with the same, the same money, the grant.
It's the same for us. Yeah, we're looking down our list of projects and we just have to kill projects that we don't have funding for, which is unfortunate. But that's kind of where we're at. So yeah, it's just a decision matrix of what's the most important.
Sure. So I think with the Gateway project, couple learning lessons. You can never predict the economy when you go out to bid, but like the nice gentleman said, there are timelines and deadlines on all grant funded projects. And so we actually lost an entire year to some negotiations with telecommunication companies that didn't want to come off the power poles. And on this project, all the power poles are going to go away and everything's going to be undergrounded. So that was something out of our control. But because we lost that 1 year, when we did get out to bid, this is before we went out to bid. When we got out to bid, the economy was terrible, inflation, material shortages. We had a hard time getting transformers, still having a hard time getting transformers. But it's one of those things that you don't prepare for. You a lot of time because of the timelines and things that you're under. But because of that, we have asked for a couple extensions. And when we did go out to bid Schedule A, just the storm part of it, the grant funded part of it from Ecology, it was $1.2 million over. Gas and light were $500,000 to $1 million over. Water was $500,000 over. What we ended up doing, because we believed in this project and we wanted to see it built, is Ecology came to our help with some bid overages, and we also ended up doing rate increases for all of our utilities to help pad that problem that we had. But we're 50% now under construction, and yeah, you never know when you write the grant 2 years down the road what the economy is going to be.
I'll say we have tried to adjust some of our schedules. We have we have a project in Moses Lake where we're going to go out to bid this year, not build it till next year under the hopes of getting good prices. We've also on some projects had to start them, let the contractors order the materials that they need. Luminaires are one that we are having difficulty with, and we'll suspend the project so they're not getting dinged, so that we hopefully have the materials on hand that we need.
I'll speak a little bit from the element of, multiple folks here have projects that were funded with Ecology grant funds, and we kind of addressing projects from the before times. So projects that were planned, applied for, bid out, etc. Before we hit the pandemic, before we hit the contractor shortage, before we started to have the supply chain issues. So some of the ways we're addressing these active projects that are going on is with John's, we did find some money and we're able to utilize some additional funding to provide cost and bid overruns. And we actually looked at our funding guidelines and have addressed some of the limitations that we had. We used to have a 5% bid overrun, 10% bid overrun, 5% on change orders. We've allowed for some unusual and exceptional circumstances, and we felt that the pandemic and these unforeseen supply chain issues warranted us going into that direction. So we got some flexibility through our administration. Some of the other projects, like with Marysville, where folks, it actually became a much larger and, more advantageous project, but we are always in the position of not being able to fund previously funded objectives. You can't come in and get more money for the same project. So we've incurred in certain, multiple folks, Marysville and a few others, where we've had them take their original grant that was a design construct and split it. So great, we'll fund design, you'll get your design going, and then having them come back in for funding and de-obligate the funds for construction. So they're able to come back in with a budget that's more, for requests that's more realistic for what they need to build and reflects today's cost. And then going forward, as we kind of continue moving toward uncertainty, I don't think there's, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're seeing a lot of different bids come in. I don't think anyone quite knows what it's going to do in the next 3 to 5 years. We've got the federal money rolling in, who's going to be taking on, we've got state money. There's going to be a lot of competition for contractors going forward. So I think the bids are going to continue to be unpredictable. So we've asked folks to come in. Last year, we moved from encouraging folks to come in separately for planning, design, and construct to a full step process. So grants that want construction dollars need to come in first for design dollars. So we've separated those out and in hopes of not leaving communities kind of holding the bag where they're on the hook to complete a project with grant funds that are nowhere near what they need to finish the project. And then same thing.
Yeah, thanks. That's great.
I'll just mention at WSDOT, about 20 years ago, we did a lot more design bid build, and we had a lot more staff that would ramp up with our funding, and then we'd have to lay folks off. So from a staffing perspective, we're doing more design build, which means we don't have as many internal WSDOT staff that are ramping up for every time we get a funding package. It also leads to innovation and efficiencies, hopefully, that help get to some of the costs that we're dealing with and the uncertainties. And, ultimately, at the end of the day, we have these chunks of money that are given to us, and they'll kind of go as far as they go. And there will be projects that we would hope to get to that maybe wouldn't get funded this round. So yeah, that's another thing we've done at WSDOT on the staff side.
Sure.
I was gonna say, we also have another project called Gateway 2. Same as Gateway 1, opposite end of town, funded with Ecology. We too, it's a design, permit, construct project, but we're gonna take it one step at a time. We're gonna design it, permit it, see where we are with the economy at that time. So,
Yeah, I was just gonna jump in and kind of second you. We found through the grant process that actually following that protocol of maybe even using some city funds to do a conceptual design that'll support your grant application for a design application that will then support your application for a construction application, or it's actually the best way to go about business. And I think we'll get to this, I know, later on, but it also helps us kind of rein in those escalating costs and deal with contingencies throughout that process.
Great, thank you. Those last couple of points touch on the next question, which was, has your approach to planning and funding capital projects changed due to escalating costs? So does anyone have anything else to add that we haven't covered on that topic?
I have just a couple things from the planning perspective. I think you've been hearing a lot about folks working on prioritization, thinking about new factors like 6 ppb quinone, really looking at how can we model where to best treat and put in stormwater infrastructure. So I think that's a really important piece up front. The research and the monitoring to really support that is going to be important. Having a complete inventory for us, statewide inventory, is really challenging, really difficult. We're looking to try to quadruple our inventory efforts so we can really get better informed with the decisions and investments that we're making. And then, one other approach from planning that our Fish Passage work did a lot is geographic bundling of projects. So really looking at getting contractors out one time, getting them mobilized one time, having less impact to the traveling public, not having to go back to the same communities over and over with impacts. And then just the contractor efficiencies really helps with stretching those dollars further. So And we see those efficiencies at every stage, from maintenance to monitoring or any other component related to a bundled project. So,
Just on the long-term front with our planning and funding as we're going forward. With the idea that we all know Matka, we've switched funding sources, so Matka is a little bit less volatile, so we know we have a more reliable and steady source of funding. However, we are anticipating and encouraging projects are going to be larger. We're going to be funding fewer but larger projects. Just so everyone knows, we actually went and upped our base level. It used to be $5 million of grant funding per recipient. Now we're able to, we bumped that up to 10 with the ability for a highly complex project, or if we have a special case and available funding, we could potentially go over that if need be. One of the other strategies that we're looking at, we used to operate a little more under the assumption that when we were working with recipients or potential applicants, we assumed that they would be getting grant dollars and that they should be prepping and preparing as if they were solely funded by state dollars. And now we're looking at encouraging folks to early on in their planning stages, looking at meeting your minimum in addition to your SERP, getting your CPA, looking at your full SERP requirements, getting your public meetings, getting yourself set up so you can be flexible when the funding comes. We have a lot of additional federal funding come in, and we want folks to be able to take advantage of, we've had of either federal funding or state funding or a combination, because we typically have a little bit more flexibility in our loan dollars, our SRF fund. And also there's kind of a lot of volatility at the federal level about how many contaminants and emerging concern dollars are coming, as well as other federal grants to ecology for stormwater and my sewer, et cetera.
I would just add, maybe a general comment from Spokane's perspective. We just finished our first round of our 6-year capital program for 2024 to 2029. And I can tell you, we spent a lot more time than we have historically just scrutinizing the numbers that we're putting out, just because it just feels like we're kind of chasing our tail right now. So
We're relying pretty heavily on our consultants and contractors to be a source of information for cost escalation, delivery of materials, and what those long lead times might be. We do this as an oversight, but our consultants and our contractors are out there doing this every day, and they've got some really valuable information. So you have those strong relationships with those folks. That's a great source of data to start looking at contingencies.
I tack onto that and say too that our bidding process, or how we estimate, is we use unit prices, and it's kind of a lagging indicator, and we've struggled to kind of, how do we get more timely quotes, more timely prices? And I do think we've done a better job of working with contractors and trying to bring in outside resources that help us level that out.
I think one of the big takeaways for me in terms of planning, in the old days, you would have a project, 60%, you would notify utilities they need to move out of the way. There was really no questions asked. These utilities have the same constraints that we do: inflation, materials shortages, staffing shortages. And I think the takeaway for me in terms of getting the outside utilities involved at the time, even at the time you write the grant, as much time as you can give them to adjust their budgets and their schedules so they can move out of the way in time for your project. We, like on Gateway, we got people involved early on, but there were some that kind of straggled, and 60 and 90% they found out at that stage. And with the constraints with the economy, my takeaway is get all utilities that need to move out of the way on board, even at the time you write the grant. Get them on board and give them as much time as you can so they can adjust their schedules and budgets.
So playing on the contingency bit a little bit, Keith, from what you said, and then Mark also just scrutinizing the numbers. How have you recently adjusted typical construction cost contingencies for estimation purposes? And that could be from a construction perspective for materials, but also at a planning stage, those contingencies early on that kind of get smaller as you zero in on the project a little more.
I hate to say this, but from my point, my understanding is we really haven't adjusted our contingencies that much. We have numbers that we're comfortable with, that we work with, and we just kind of run with that, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, I would say we have increased our contingencies. I couldn't say for sure how much, but they've probably gone up a little bit. You know, one of the tricky things that we've been running into, which I'm sure a lot of you have too, is trying to procure materials. We've had several instances where we've put projects out to bid, and the contractors have come back and said, yeah, we can get started with some of it this year, but we're gonna have to finish the rest of it the following year because we can't get a pump for another 18 months. And so what they end up doing is they give you a 2024 bid instead of a 2023 bid. So then you're paying more money for that. So that procurement piece has been really tricky for us, to the point where we've started buying stuff on our own, which is not a line of work or a line of business that we care to be in, but it's been necessary to, you know, meet some of our funding deadlines and things like that. So just tricky.
Oh, and on that front, we worked to kind of adapt a little bit. Once again, once shortages started hitting, we have several. Previously, it was pretty rare for us to allow a pre-purchase and a piece of equipment or supply, et cetera. We did a pivot when pandemic hit, supply shortages started hitting, and we've just kind of like we do for property acquisition. We're like, yes, we know, go ahead, buy these things, storage fees. If, you know, we've had folks that have had to rent out storage areas to hold, you know, particularly tough to get components. We've allowed those as eligible for your grants, as long as that gets used in the final project. So we'll usually hold it till the end of the funding agreement, but it would be eligible to me, you know, to recoup those kinds of costs. And then same with contingencies. We've seen a lot of big change in what's coming in the program when we know you're applying for funding a full year ahead of even knowing if you have the funding or going out to bid. So typically when we're doing review and ranking, we've looked fairly closely at level of contingency per design of project and how that would impact scores. I anticipate that going forward and in these next couple rounds of applications and award processes, we're gonna be a little broader in how we interpret that. I've seen everything, you know, as high as 20% plus.
Yeah, to clarify, just because I want to clarify, for that free purchase and then I can use it later in the reimbursement, does the purchase have to happen after the active date of the agreement, even though like maybe the design is not necessarily accepted yet, or can that be before the active date of the agreement? Ultimately gets used?
I don't, right, and using a materials on hand essentially. So we haven't crossed that bridge technically yet. We haven't run into that situation, but it's a great question and something that I think you may look at addressing, just like we do for land, looking at just like we do with land. Like if you already own the land, you're using the value of the land as your match for your project. Value for on-hand materials, I think that's something we can be flexible with, especially if we provide that justification of this has been a difficult to get item, there's a cost savings, et cetera, et cetera.
Adam?
I always find real numbers interesting, so I went and dug back into, because we all know this is an issue, we see it every day, but I think in our day-to-day lives, sometimes we gloss over this and it's what we've got to deal with. I went back and looked at the previous ecology grant funded projects that we had, and we've always kind of stuck with that 20% contingency for construction. What's interesting looking back is that the first cycle was 2014, 2017. And our 20% contingency didn't cover it. We actually went 25% over that between when we estimated the project, went out to construction and finalized construction. And that's really pretty typical from the looks of things. What's really crazy is the last 3-year cycle during COVID. Our escalation was 47%. So it's a real thing. And honestly, I don't know how we're gonna deal with that in future applications, but I know that we're having internal discussions about what that construction contingency looks like and what a real number is. And the issue we get into there is not only making a grant that is approachable, but also talking to our exec and letting them know that, yeah, this 30% we think is crazy is actually low. And we need to set this money aside. And I'm curious from the panel too, we're starting to see escalation on the design side as well, beyond our 20%. So not only construction, but also from design, consultants are having to make up the difference. And we're seeing that in our rates and the fees.
I agree with that. I think, again, inflation has been over everything, materials, labor, it doesn't matter. So it touches on every aspect of life.
Which parts of your program are due to multiple programs that have had the biggest impact from recent inflation? And maybe on the positive side, have there been any outcomes that have been beneficial for future planning that you feel like have been good lessons learned, making things more efficient or better?
Well, I'm a little biased, but I'd say bridges and fish passage, it's the things, our structures have gone up, and then HMA, I saw a price for $250 a ton the other day, and I just have a hard time getting my head around it. And then I think positive outcomes, we'll see, it's neutral at this point, but we have been forced to look at different ways to deliver our projects. Using GECs was something I never thought I'd see WSDOT ever do. And now we're into, like Tony was mentioning, the design, the DD, the design build. And I think we're even starting to tweak that process with the progressive design build, where I think we have one project that's working underneath it, hopefully trying to eliminate change orders, have more input on the design side to be sure that we get what we want to get.
Use a few acronyms there. I know.
Design, yeah. So design bid build is the typical way that, we design it 100%, we put it out for bill for bid and it gets built. We do design build, which is we work with the GEC, and it's a little more complicated than that, but we pick someone and they start to design it. We give them the boundaries that we want to have. They start to design it and then they can bid it or build it. And it kind of crushes that schedule down a little bit because there's some overlap in there. And then I'll get in trouble here because the progressive is new. I don't think we've completed a project on it, but my understanding is that we have more say on the design side, and we actually pick someone or we pick and there's no cost associated with it at that point until it's designed, and then we have off ramps if we can't come to a conclusion on the construction end of it. But then it works more like a design build project. So it's a tweak.
$50 for HMA, what were you seeing before? Just to
I
put it
remember.
out there.
Yeah, I mean, if we're gonna, I was gonna say $80 a ton.
Really, okay.
It has. This was a little project, way out, not a huge 1,000 tons, so not, small, but I was just surprised. And then if I'm gonna go down that road then too, is traffic control. Is that another one? Our prices have really increased on them.
I don't know. How much is due to what we might describe as just inflation, just gradually, things getting a little more expensive, and what a lot of it actually, a lot of things are actually turning out to be more and more just corporate price gouging. Like great.
I'd have to defer to,
I would just repeat the question.
yeah. I guess maybe I'm naive and I hope that they're not,
But
but
the people are actually admitting it. The companies are admitting, we're jacking our prices and using inflation as a means to kind of cover up the fact that we're making it more expensive, but they are openly saying
that's a good question.
We've heard that from some material suppliers, but generally speaking, we're not saying that. They're blaming workforce and material shortages is what we're hearing.
house or captain plan elsewhere, when really it's, you know, like a bunch of guys, probably sitting in a massive office, you know, like wanting to get their corporate profits going. Good to know.
We'll never know.
I think we do know, and the first rule is don't ever trust anything a big CEO says.
Did anybody else have any positive outcomes
I could-
that you want to share?
I could get one. I guess one, maybe one positive thing that's come out of this for us is, you know, we as a city have always kind of been pretty set in our ways in terms of materials and products that we'll allow on projects. You know, when things are scarce, it, you know, kind of forces you to look elsewhere. And so I'd say we maybe broadened our horizons a little bit, material wise, so.
Okay.
Positive thing for us.
Yes. No.
It's one of the things I think we're seeing across the board with a lot of our recipients across the state is a renewed interest in planning and kind of being more strategic, and moving a lot of the you know, there's, what I'm hearing a little bit is that there's more interest at the decision maker level for what value they're getting for the projects and planning them ahead and understanding why they're doing the projects. And I've also seen a little bit more interest in working with multi-benefit projects. As far as dollars need to stretch further, they need to be combined from multiple areas. So I think that's positive overall, I think, for our, what we're doing, the work we're doing.
Yeah, one more came to mind on the positive side. Certainly at WSDOT, we have much more of an appetite in the stormwater world for partnership with all the municipalities, with all the folks at this conference. And, you know, we're working on the same big goal here. And, you know, often it is that, you know, the land might be the thing that is lacking, or it may be, you know, the resources or the maintenance or, you know, the workforce. But I think if we combine together, I think some of those hurdles we can get over. And with the insurge of funding from all these different sources, I think there's a lot of opportunity to make some connections and do more partnership work.
I don't know if this is question just for WSDOT. I always was under the impression that a lot of the construction they built, you know, stormwater, something that was all done in-house. Is that true? Or is it more, was it more kind of outsourcing, or was it?
Well, like we mentioned, we're getting to more and more design build, which means, you know, the private sector is doing the design and the build on a lot of that. We still do a lot of in-house maintenance. You know, usually when the project's done, there's some period that the contractor helps get it through, you know, establishment warranty, but then it kind of comes back to WSDOT. But yeah, we're doing more and more. And again, we're trying to not chase these big peaks and valleys of funding and having to lay people off, you know, just to meet the demands of the legislature's asks. So we're trying to do a better job of keeping kind of a level staffing, which requires a lot more partnership with the private sector and with the public.
I heard that one of the things is like keeping it in-house and more kind of like public, you know, development. It actually acts as a bulwark in order to combat, you know, what we call, you know, inflation or price gouging. You know, so maybe that could be a potential thing, you know, push to the legislator, to the management, saying, hey, let's just keep it all in-house. Let's not do it with a bunch of guys who are trying to, you know, let's skim off the top, you know, but, you know, it's cheat us.
Thanks for your time.
Thanks. At what point in a project do you engage other funding mechanisms when you start to see overages, and has that changed in recent years? And maybe ecology from your perspective, when have you started to see that, and has that changed?
It's a little bit of it's an interesting question, because we've seen, this is coming at a point in the ecology funding programs where we were just at the point, we're about 10 years in the development of our program, the integration with the larger combined program that includes the state revolving fund, et cetera. So folks were kind of getting used to how our program worked and planning and about how many projects they could meter out when we got these changes. And thinking forward, we've now have to plan. At the same time this was happening, we had very steady funding. We ended up with a lot of money coming back to us in terms of failed projects or folks that didn't think through plan design or, just had costs extend over time. And we ended up having a lot of projects that died. Money came back to the point where our reappropriations at the state level got quite large. And so right about the time this was all happening, when everyone was having huge overruns, at the same time, we were being pressured to manage our reappropriations, the money that was aging and been sitting there, 3-4 biennia. So we have now built into our planning process a little bit of trying to anticipate how many overruns we're going to get and how we build that into how much money we initially give out, because we no longer have easy access in the way we manage funds, because how large that reappropriation element grew. We don't have such easy access to be able to just recycle money into new projects or bid overruns. We're a little bit more limited. So we've had to start planning out, okay, we think we're going to have build into our budget, we're going to hold back X amount for these kinds of overruns. So we've had to restructure how we provide funding over the 2 years, given our annual biennial budget, or excuse me, our biennial budget.
Thanks. And just to add to that, or ask you to explain, because we're kind of losing some of that reappropriated money after it's over that many biennia. They're taking it back because they're just reappropriating, and we're getting pressure from above to spend that money or lose it. So that's, everybody's going to design only instead of design and construct, and we're losing that construction money. So it's a very interesting problem in ecology as well.
We deal with that a lot, so funding is different, I feel, but
Is it or lose it?
yes, which I'm glad we don't run our household.
I think it lends to what we're really asking is for, once again, we know with these, as the contingencies are rising, a better understanding of really what you can spend out in a reasonable amount, so that we can do our cash flow models to make sure that we're anticipating what's coming in, what's going out, rate it will be spent. We're looking a little bit more closely when folks ask for a spend out report, when we expect that money to actually come out, because we have projects that will sit for 4 to 5 years on the books without anything leaving that we've got obligated. So we're generally going to be tightening down on at the same time we want to be more flexible. We're also going to be looking a little bit more closely with our project managers to say, hey, if this nothing's moved on this for 2-3 years, we're going to potentially start invoking those clauses that are in our contracts about failure to commence work, et cetera, in order that we can keep the money moving within a reasonable amount of time. So that's kind of a change coming.
Question for you then. Have you considered allowing us to upgrade our engineering estimate at the time of the board? Because that 9-month gap just in the last year has been escalating costs. So by the time I submit my grant, I don't need, I'm well over the ask.
Right, and that's that thing we're wrestling with now, where they're talking about putting contingencies into your design bid and what your expectation is for over the year. We can do that, and we do that with our loan dollars. So we can do some modifications there at the time of award. We also have had some instances where so you do your application in August, we do the review ranking, draft list comes out in January, and we have that public comment period where, because that's just a draft list at that time. And if there is additional information, we have looked at that in certain cases, or if there's something, you've learned additional information, et cetera. We hope that you're at least through your design and using the engineer's estimate. Your engineer's estimate is pretty good if you're at design only. But we have looked at that in some really specific cases. Additionally, just to clarify, when we talk about bid overrun availability, we are not looking at the amount of money you put in your grant application when we're calculating your eligibility and how much of bid overrun dollars you can receive. We are looking at the final engineer's estimate going out with the bid docs. So we do account for that when we're looking at if we can provide you additional funding for bid overruns.
Do you have any sense of what is causing some of these failures to meet the grant requirements? Is it staffing or
So a couple things that I think we're seeing. One is staffing for sure. We know engineering services that are short supply, heavy trading. We're all competing for the same tiny pool of engineers. Boy, why didn't I switch to engineering? Because I think that's only going to continue to get worse. We all just swap engineers about every 5 years or so. So there's a staffing issue as far as capacity to manage at the local level for project management. And then also we had that backup back in 2016 where the funding programs, basically we had the market shortage, we put 16s on hold, we put 17s on hold, we had 18s, we had a glut of funding, and nobody really wants to go to their council and say, actually, we're gonna give that money back. A lot of people just took that glut of money and couldn't really manage it over time and get those projects in the ground and find people to build them in that time. So it's a little bit of adjustment from the 2016 issue as well.
Yeah, I'm in there with the county. I just want to jump on that because it resonates with me. I had 3 ecology grants that went through just that. So we were delayed and then we got funding as a surprise. We had to hurry up and deliver those projects. And we did our best to deliver them, but still now with like COVID and staff turnover and the sunk cost of investing in staff to try and get a project out the door is ridiculous. So what's overall cost of doing things like design build seems like a short-term solution, maybe a bit cost, but also kind of acknowledging you lose the opportunity for the bid to have that competition to bring that cost too. So that's a blessing and a curse. And I think ultimately I'm hearing that there's money on the table, but there's not staff to do it. So I'm also advocating for more staff, even if we rely on consultants for the heavy lift, we still need staff to review and approve things.
I think we've learned is money doesn't fix everything, and you can throw it at it, but you can only fit so many contractors in an area. There's only so many designers out there.
Yeah, and we need, workforce development. We need to think about people as an asset and, invest in our workforce. And that's part of resiliency for us to get through and deliver all this work.
And just to share out too, at the local level for our permittees, we are increasing. We did receive a base level increase for our capacity dollars going forward. And one of the ideas and intent around that is to increase the local capacity to manage some of these projects, do some planning, et cetera, and have staff on site. That also seems to be one of the issues for small and mid-sized communities, is even if you hire a consultant, you still need to manage the consultant and that staff time. One of the other pieces that we're doing at Ecology is we've hired additional engineers for our small communities who are specifically focused on supporting small communities. And just a thing that not too many people know, we've rarely used it, maybe not even in stormwater yet. But we also, through our state revolving loan dollars, can facilitate essentially getting a project manager into a small community. So we have specific resources available for small communities or mid-size. If you've got issues, please contact your regional folks like Shilo. He's here on the east side to be able to find some of those resources, get some of the small communities some engineering help to help them understand what it is they're buying into when they apply for a project. Because I think a lot of times, and maybe Shilo, you could share, when consultants come in with a project, making sure we're, right, is it a high priority for the community? I don't know if you have experience on that you want to share from the east side.
Yeah, absolutely. Seems like there is a delay on the staff level at the local jurisdictions to see these projects through. The consultant seems to be ready to go and have everything in order, but there's that staffing bottleneck.
All right, we've kind of already moved into this. Are there any other questions from the audience? Yeah,
I have a question about fuel costs. We've had contractors come to us and say, hey, we did this at $3 a gallon, $6 a gallon. Do you ever include those types of things in your cost model, or have you ever allowed a contractor to come back to the table to get reimbursed for that volatile market?
WSDOT actually has specifications on steel and oil, and two that I know of, that they're allowed to make a cost adjustment. You know, there's a negotiation that goes on, that from the time they bid it to the time it starts, that the fuel, oil for asphalt, you know, goes up quite a bit, that we will make that whole. I was just kind of wondering if, is that an idea maybe you could use with Darcy's, you know, question, that they do their design, and that there's a special in there that allows for a little bit of inflation in it, if I'm understanding her question. You know, basically what I heard was that you design it, by the time you kind of get it back, the prices have increased, and it throws a wrench into the whole thing.
We have seen some, we've had some contractors approach us for equitable adjustments, and we're just using the WSDOT approach for that, not for fuel. Our spec is written so that fuel and incidentals are part of the cost price. But definitely, we've run into HMA in the past few years. We run into the double iron pipe recently. We're seeing it now with storm pipe. And it's just a moving target since COVID. It's one thing after another, and who knows what's next.
That's Eric, because now when I've seen plastic pipe has gone up.
I have a question for any and all of you. You guys ran into being able to pay for expedited service, like being on the list for running into this with materials. And what we're competing with is the open market. So we're stuck with one price as a government agency. They can sell it for more on the open market. But if we'll pay to be expedited up into the queue for an exact amount of dollars, then we may or may not get our parts sooner. We've had that offered to us twice now. Have you guys?
So the question,
We're taking it.
the question was about what contractors offer expedited pricing on materials and how that's been handled.
I have not seen that.
We've seen it on electronics so far in our case.
I can see that.
Like you said, I know what's happening, or doing things, what are some of the methods you've been using to try to get more people to sign up for this?
Question was related to staffing shortages and methods used to
Yeah.
encourage more staff to
Yeah, encourage more people to take the job or take the
Okay.
position. and everything.
recruit more staff.
Yeah, recruit more staff.
I'd say when I very first started at WSDOT, you came in as if you were an engineer, you came in as an E1, and that was it. You know, there was no, and we do E2 in training. We have opened up a lot of our positions to outside people. I think just to try to fill those spots, you know. I worked at WSDOT for 5 years, went to work for a consulting firm, and then when they make this last round of rehiring, that I had to come back in as an E1. You know, which was a cut in pay, but I like working here and I saw some opportunity. But now they've kind of feels like they formalized that process, and again, we have E2 and trainings, you know, we're trying to fill some of these higher level spots rather than having to work on.
Well, what I just said, like what the positions are, like what are you using to basically entice everybody? Hey, you get higher benefits, you do more flex time, you know, what are you like?
Yeah, I mean,
What are you doing to basically say like, hey, you want to work here versus say, maybe you want to go work in the private sectors? You know, I mean, there's plenty of benefits. I know working in the public versus private, so that's why I want to know what do you find that's you're using, and what do you find, if anything, is what's working?
well, certainly trying to be an employer of choice by providing, you know, folks that can work from home if they're not in the field. We provide a lot of internships as well, and that's a really good way to connect with folks that are bridging their education into their professional. We have a high school to highway program.
Those are paid internships, right?
Yeah, paid
Okay,
internships.
And then some public sectors during the OA try to pull that shit about paying anybody, you know, and say you'll give you educational opportunities. It was a real shit show.
Okay.
So, yeah, okay, so continue.
the high school to highway program, it's a way to, essentially an apprenticeship for folks that don't want to go to a four-year college and still get a career pathway in the maintenance division. And we're just using a lot more, marketing tools to get the word out to more diverse populations, trying to better reflect the communities we serve with who we're hiring.
You going out and these include maybe, I don't know, setting up like career fairs, at local colleges or any those other locations.
High schools, high school, colleges. Yep.
Yeah. I know the public sector often is heavily unionized. You have like some members, going down and also, saying, hey, join up, stable work and everything with all that.
Not on the professional side. On the field side, we're unionized.
I was never for about a year. We were, design teams are unionized as well.
I would say that governmental agencies have not been in the practice of having to compete for people until recently, and so we're learning. And it is a marketing thing that we're all trying to figure out. We've seen some jurisdictions on the west side offering hiring bonuses. And I would also say that we're finding that if your salary is not competitive with your competitors, we're not going to get people applying for your jobs.
And what I was trying to do is like in my position, the hydraulic engineer, we have several. Where before you had to work your way through the ranks to get there, there's just no other way. And now we have like hydraulic engineering training. You can come in as an E1. There's a laid out benchmarks for you, and you hit those, you progress up. So you're almost guaranteed 3 years of being 5. If you get told line, you never do that.
Well, that's kind of how it's supposed to be. Start off from there and then work your way up. That's kind of how. That was the promise of many companies before everything started going down. It's like you work your way up over the time, with guaranteed employment and income. That's kind of
but you eliminate people in a sense, though, from coming in with more education, more experience, the way we did it before with the E1, E2, So like back to that example, if someone has the chops, they'll come in as an E3 and then work their way up to that E5 level. Well, we did not do that before.
We didn't.
I think let's move to the next question. If that's okay. You had one?
I was just gonna offer that I actually started my career with WSDOT as an intern when I was at Ecology, so I really appreciated that. And I probably would be in the government at this point if I didn't start my career there. I didn't stay at WSDOT because of competitive salaries and what have you. I had to jump around to move up, but I just acknowledging that was my pathway into this. And I think a good way to retain people is to show that they have a lot more control than they have closer access to decision making versus consulting. You do a lot of good work, but less controls scope of it. So more empowered and have to get so I think.
Thanks for that. Any other questions? Any last words from panelists?
Yeah. Actually, I think this might be a great time to apply for money. We applied for a flood grant about 4 weeks ago. 1 week into it, we got a call. Would you like to raise your application by $200,000 because nobody applied? And by the way, we're going to tell you the week after that you probably got funded because we don't have to review many of these things. I think people might be scared of the reasons we're in here today. And so this is probably a great time to apply for money.